أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. How are you? How was your weekend? And how do you influence how you feel? How do you impact how you feel? It is the same thing as last time. Notice I did give a hint about growth through struggle, which was the title of the previous iteration of this thing, or the previous framing of this. It's the same situation, but we're going to try to go a little bit deeper into it. And these questions actually connect to what I'm trying to get at over here. And the videos are obviously also going to be connected to this. I'm starting to notice a lot more of this. I'm not starting to notice this, I'm noticing that this is a more common situation than people had originally thought of. Many people did not really understand the nature of living in minority, communities where the culture is very different, has like different worldviews essentially, not just kind of like modifications of the worldview. It's just like a completely different framework, and how that can impact people, but also how living in societies where it's like more about kind of living individually, like kind of competing against everyone else instead of working together towards solutions and helping each other and so on. In those communities, how isolationism can become like a big thing that can negatively impact people's emotional and mental health and wellness overall. So something to understand over here is how like the dynamics have started to impact to the point that when they started creeping into other societies, and as globalization becomes a thing, and we're going towards a monoculture essentially, where it's everyone has essentially the same mindset, framework, thought processes, a set of opinions, prejudices and stuff. It's sort of becoming sort of like singular essentially. In those contexts, how do we understand, how do we navigate like that kind of context, and like how that impacted societies where the monoculture is sort of not getting people to come together and work together. I think that is something that people are starting to see now, and they are encouraging social, you know, like social work instead of working together with people. Social work, I mean, like social interactions and kind of like for setting up systems and programs that facilitate socialization and so on. But I think certain things to keep in mind of the stuff that has happened and carried on, how that has impacted people today. So what's happening today is more of a manifestation of what happened in the past and kind of built up in people. You can think of it sort of like mercury levels, although in those cases they may not necessarily come out of your body. They just build up, the bioaccumulation that happens from species after species that gets going up the chain, food chain. But ultimately, what I'm saying over here is that just like those things accumulate, so in this case, that accumulation can happen and then we see the results at the end. And so how do we make sure that we can reverse that process? Neuroscience is starting to show more and more that a lot of things that people thought that were permanent in the past, including trauma, can actually be reversed. That the brain, the impact of of trauma on the brain can actually start, you can reverse that and so on. Just understanding how that works. So anyways, just some review here. Okay, and then the brain games. So pick one.
Crash course.
Right. Crash course.
Do you believe somebody could be trained potentially?
Why do smart people make dumb decisions? Why do conspiracy theorists think that we didn't land on the moon or that Hillary Clinton is a space alien? And why won't Bernice admit that the new Superman movie just isn't very good? We've talked about cognition before. We usually refer to it as the process that we use to think and solve crossword puzzles and stuff. But really, cognition involves knowing, remembering, understanding, communicating, and to a certain extent, learning. And as truly wonderful as our brains are, we can be spectacularly bad at all of these things. We used to think that our cognition worked like a computer, logically processing information. But that cabbage-sized chunk of pink, wet brain matter in your skull can do a lot more than math, and the things that it does are certainly not always logical. Many experts argue that it's cognition that makes us truly human, and that everything that comes with it, our preferences, prejudices, fears, and intuitions, are what make us the individuals that we are. We're not the only animals that show some evidence of cognition, of course. Chimps and gorillas exhibit insight and planning, crows use tools, elephants teach each other, but our capacity as humans to figure stuff out is matched only by our ability to totally misjudge stuff. As prone as we are to brilliance and insight, we are equally likely to succumb to irrational thinking and false intuition. So to borrow a riff from Rene Descartes, you think, therefore you are. Which means you are brilliant a lot of the time, and sometimes you just kind of look stupid. We all want to make sense of the world, and one of the major ways our cognition allows us to do that is by forming concepts, mental groupings of similar objects, people, ideas, or events. We like to lump things together. Concepts simplify our thinking in such a fundamental way that we usually don't have to stop and think about using them. They're just there. And yet, without concepts, we'd need a unique name for everything. You couldn't just ask me to shake the anglerfish because there'd be no concept of shake or fish, let alone stuffed blue anglerfish. And if I told you that I was devastated that I lost my anglerfish, which I probably would be, I'd also have to explain my emotions, their intensities, even the words themselves that I had to use. So basically, without concepts, no one would ever get anything done. We'd all be like a bunch of ants taking all morning to say, hey, what's up? We often organize our concepts by forming prototypes, mental images, or pinnacle examples of a certain thing. For example, if I say bird, the general shape of a songbird probably pops into your head before like a penguin or a chicken or an emu, because robins and cardinals more closely resemble our bird prototype. Still, if I showed you a picture of some crazy creature you've never seen before, and you note that it has feathers and a beak, you probably file it under the bird category because it more closely resembles your concept of bird than your concept of rodent or overcoat or footstool. Concepts and prototypes speed up our thinking, but they also can box our thinking in and lead to prejudice if we see something that doesn't fit our prototypes.
Do you remember we had this conversation about prejudice in the past? One of the slides, I think in the previous framing of this series, that's when we discussed that, and we showed a person holding a gun, and we talked about how do you understand this and so on. So
100 years ago, the sight of a female doctor might have caused some heads to explode because in people's tiny minds, the prototypes of doctor and women didn't have any overlap. And actually, some people today still feel that way. Haters gonna hate. So it's important to actively keep your mind open to make room for evolving concepts, and remember that concepts may sometimes hurt as much as they help. One of the biggest ways our cognition works to our benefit, though, is through our ability to solve problems. We use our problem-solving skills all the time. How to assemble Scandinavian furniture, bake muffins with a missing ingredient, or handle the crushing disappointment of the new Superman movie. And we approach problem-solving in different ways. Sometimes we value speed, other times accuracy. Some problems we figure out using trial and error. You try something and if it doesn't work, you try it a different way and you keep at it until something works. Trial and error is slow and deliberate, which may be good or bad depending on the problem. We can also use algorithms and heuristics to...
trial and error is trying to figure out the capital T truth by trial and error.
come up with some solutions. Algorithms are logical, methodical, step-by-step procedures that guarantee an eventual solution, though they may be slow to work through. Heuristics, on the other hand, are more like mental shortcuts, simple strategies that allow us to solve problems faster, although they're more error-prone than algorithms. Say at a grocery store looking for a family-sized bottle of sriracha, you could use an algorithm and methodically check every shelf and aisle in the store, or you could use heuristics and first search the Asian or condiment sections, the places that make the most sense based on what you already know. Heuristics may be way faster, but the algorithmic approach guarantees you won't overlook the sauce along the way because they stuck it in the deli or whatever dumb thing they did this week. So algorithms, heuristics, and trial and error are problem-solving strategies that involve a plan of attack. But sometimes we get lucky while puzzling out a problem and out of nowhere, sudden flash of insight that solves the problem. I'll use an orange in the muffin recipe instead of lemon, or sriracha lives in the Mexican section. For some reason, neuroscientists have actually watched that kind of sudden happy brain flash on neuroimaging screens. In one experiment, they gave subjects a problem to solve. What word can be added to the three words crab, pine, and sauce to create a new compound word? Then they asked the subjects to press a button when they had the answer. While the subjects thought about it, scans showed activity in their frontal lobes, the areas involved in the focused attention of typical problem solving. But right at that aha moment, just as they pushed the button, there was a clear burst of activity just above the ear in the right temporal lobe, which, among many other things, is involved with recognition. The answer, by the way, we already gave you the hint earlier in the episode. Where's my fish? Those sudden bursts of insight aren't awesome, but you can't always count on them to solve all your problems. And just because something feels right doesn't mean it's truly correct, because as inventive and smarty pants as we may be, our cognition often leads us astray in all kinds of ways. For instance, we often look for and favor evidence that verifies our ideas, while we're more likely to ignore contradictory evidence, a tendency known as confirmation bias. Is really similar to the overconfidence we've talked about when you're basically more confident than you are correct. When this kind of cognitive bias takes hold, you might cling to your initial conceptions in a kind of belief perseverance, even in the face of clear proof to the contrary. This happens all the time, and it can be maddening for people watching it happen. People still think that the Earth is flat. It's like, what? How? There's space pictures. Probably don't need to tell you, people can get really weird and defensive when they evade facts and choose to see only the information that confirms their beliefs. They may even become functionally fixed, unable to view a problem from a new perspective. Instead, they just keep approaching a situation with the same mental set, especially if it's worked in the past. So you got a nail sticking out from a board, and you're like, I need to take care of that. There's rocks and bricks all around you, but because of your functional fixedness on the idea that only hammers work on nails, you don't even consider hitting it with the brick, and instead you waste a bunch of time looking for the hammer in your garage, and you're angry and frustrated, and there's still a nail sticking up from the board. So our mental set predisposes how we think, just as you'll remember that our perceptual set predisposes how we perceive. This is what makes heuristics, those super convenient mental shortcuts that we all use, so easily fallible. In the 1970s, cognitive psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman researched how we make snap judgments and discovered one way smart people make dumb decisions. They found that people believe an event will be more likely to occur if they can conjure up examples or memories of it, especially if those examples are particularly vivid, scary, or awesome. So say you're in a casino and you win $2 at a slot machine. Suddenly, every flashing light and ringing bell in the place goes off, but when you lose, which is the vast majority of the time, it's just crickets. With all their lights and noise making, the casino makes sure that wins are super vivid and memorable, while losses just go away unacknowledged. That way, the next time you're standing there with $100 in your pocket, you're more likely to overestimate your chances of winning because the memories of winning are more striking. The more mentally available those memories are, the more it seems that it's going to happen again.
So think about this also on the negative side. If you feel like something negative is going to happen, and you have a lot of memories of those things, or you have a single memory that was really vivid, you might actually perceive that those things are going to keep happening.
This is known as the availability heuristic, and it can warp our judgments of people, too. If we keep remembering news footage that shows people of a given group shooting guns, that can shape our impression of the entire group, even if what we saw was only a tiny minority within that group. Essentially, we're great at fearing the wrong things. We worry about being killed in a plane crash or getting bitten in half by a shark or accidentally choking on a dumpling. Thanks to our brain's B-roll of horrific images, we come to fear what's actually very rare instead of worrying about much more common but less memorable ends like car accidents, cancer, and heart failure. Our thinking can also be swayed by framing or how an issue is presented. Imagine you're considering climbing Everest or getting a nose job or eating a bowl of raw blowfish. I could frame the risks in different ways. Telling you that you've got a 95% chance of survival sounds a lot different than saying 5 out of 100 people die doing this activity, though the information is the same. Our cognitive minds are capable of incredible intellectual feats and tremendous failures. We can solve problems better than any organism on the planet, but given the chance, we can also mess up a pretty simple judgment every day of the week. But if we're mindful of our capacity for error, and if we honor our ingenuity and intellect, I think our ability to solve any problem is nearly infinite, and that gives me a lot of hope. Seriously though, where is my fish? Today, you learned how we use concepts, prototypes, and our mental sets to think and communicate, and how algorithms, heuristics, and insight help us solve problems. You also learned about how fixation, the availability heuristic, fear, overconfidence, and belief perseverance can get in the way of good decision-making and thinking. Thank you for watching, especially to our Subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course, get a special laptop decal, or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to subbable.com/crashcourse. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPestino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwat. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins. The script supervisor is Michael Aranda, who is also our...
Alright. Any thoughts on this so far? Think about how you can also use some of those strategies when dealing with people, or understanding in terms of how you can use those understandings to come up with strategies and how to deal with people.
Being a pilot in the Air Force is freedom, service.
So this is another TED Talk.
Raise your hand. You'd like to win the lottery. Keep your hand raised. In the past month, you actually bought a lottery ticket. You don't need a psychologist to tell you why you didn't buy those tickets. You didn't expect to win. Given the odds of winning the lottery, that might seem like a reasonable conclusion. But what's important to learn here is that you act based on what you expect, not what you want. What you want and what you expect are completely different. An expectation is a belief about whether or not you're going to get what you want. As a psychologist that studies how people create their futures, one of the things I've learned is that having an expectation that differs from what you want isn't just the reason you don't buy lottery tickets. It's the reason why there are lots of things that you want, but you can't quite seem to attain them. Losing that last 5 to 10 pounds, going for that dream job or relationship. It's the reason why no matter how hard you try to create change, you often stay stuck. Because expectation plus action equals creation of your life experiences.
So here you can focus on what are those expectations and why, when you do certain actions based on certain expectations or lowercase t truths, and when those actions don't end up leading to certain things that you expected, then how that can conflict things, right? How that can cause overwhelm and frustration and many things.
Now, it might surprise you to know that most people go about day-to-day life thinking that they're acting on what they want, when in reality, they're acting on their expectations. I was working with a client of mine recently. I'm going to call her Amy. She was a gorgeous and successful woman, but she was also sort of shy, very self-deprecating, and she had a history of picking the wrong men. Amy had recently gotten out of a bad marriage, and she worked on herself, so she was ready to meet someone new. And she decided she was going to give online dating a try. that she was having one bad date after the next. The men didn't look like their pictures. They would forget their wallets. Some of them didn't show up at all. One day, Amy comes into my office and she immediately bursts into tears. I had the most awful date of my life. Well, how bad was he? He was amazing, she said. Absolutely everything I had been looking for. She said, I completely blew it. I was so certain this was going to be another bad date and a waste of my time that I told him to meet me for coffee after my yoga class. Didn't have time to shower, so I showed up in my gym clothes, hot and sweaty, no makeup. And there he was, Mr. Immaculately groomed, tall and handsome, with perfect smile. She said, I was so mortified and self-conscious, I couldn't even make eye contact. I just sat there, staring at the ground, laughing nervously, until finally I told him I had to put more money in my parking meter, and then I left, without even saying goodbye. Amy acted on what she expected, another bad date. Not what she wanted, which was to meet that great guy.
I noticed if a person is trying to get out of a certain bad experience, or they want to not really let their future actions be determined by the past experiences, negative ones like trauma or some other kind of negative situation, then in that case, if they're expecting the same thing to happen again, you can see how that can become an obstacle, and you can see how that person can become really worried about how their life might turn out to be, simply because of the expectations that they had. So they might feel a certain way because that's what they're thinking. They're expecting that this is how things are going to come out, and so they might even forecast their own downfall, or they might forecast some negative event happening, and they might even look at a particular situation and frame it in a negative way, and then they end up actually, sometimes it's self-fulfilling prophecy, sometimes it's where they came in like this person coming in thinking a certain way, and then they realize that they were the ones who messed up, and then it becomes more difficult because you start blaming yourself for a lot more of those things, and these cycles can continue like that.
I wish I could say this kind of behavior was uncommon. But having been in practice for more than 12 years, one of the things I hear most often is I want to change my life, but I don't really believe that I can. I've seen people give up on their marriages, their health, their careers, give up on their entire lives because they didn't think they could get what they wanted, so they weren't willing to try. There's probably something that you want in your life right now, but you're not sure if you can attain it, and so you're holding back. When you don't act on what you want, you take yourself out of the game. Buying that lottery ticket doesn't guarantee winning, but not buying it guarantees losing. Now you might be wondering, why do we do this? Our brains work on the principle of anticipation. We constantly predict what we think is likely to happen before it ever occurs. If you're walking in the park and you hear a dog barking behind you, and then turn around to see Bigfoot, you're going to be very surprised. Although it would make a really great selfie. As soon as you start to anticipate any event, you begin to act and feel in ways that help you prepare for what you think is going to happen. If anyone's ever said to you, we need to talk, then you know exactly what I mean. I see the men nodding. When you prepare for something that hasn't even happened yet, you participate in creating the outcome. In other words, you create the self-fulfilling prophecy. Because Amy was acting anxious and ambivalent before her date, she acted on what she expected, not what she wanted, and so she got what she expected. Another bad date. One of the reasons that our expectations can keep us so stuck is we have an automatic tendency to use the past to predict the future. If you failed once, you're likely to think you might fail again. When you think about the future, the same part of the brain gets activated as when you think of the past. However, just because you use the past to make predictions doesn't mean that your past is what's holding you back. What was holding Amy back wasn't her past. It was that she didn't believe her future could be better than the past. And without that belief, she wasn't able to create something better, even though an opportunity had presented itself right in front of her. If you're aware of what your expectations are in a situation, then you have the ability to use your conscious mind to override the automatic thinking and plan for how to create a different outcome. If Amy had planned for her date to go well, things might have turned out differently. Our expectations about our ability to get what we want have a very profound impact on our emotional well-being.
Let me see if you guys can listen to that right there.
Expectations about our ability to get what we want have a very profound impact on our emotional well-being.
So
And for her date to go well, things might have turned out differently. Our expectations about our ability to get what we want have a very profound impact on our emotional well-being. A large part of our brain is dedicated to anticipating rewards. Rewards, to put it simply, are all the things you want that make life worth living. As J.R. Tolkien said, a single dream is more powerful than 1,000 realities. When you expect to get a reward, you feel positive emotions like happiness and joy. But when you don't think you're going to get what you want, you feel sadness, disappointment, maybe even depression.
Now notice the last time I asked the question of the why you feel, when do you feel a certain way, and how do you control your emotions, and how do you impact the way you feel, and so on. This is the concept that I was really getting at. What you expect, the way you think is going to happen, or whatever it is, those truths that you have in your mind can have this impact on you in terms of how you end up feeling relative to whatever you expected or wanted or thought is supposed to happen.
The larger the gap between what you expect and what you want, the more distressed you feel. So what do you do when what you want doesn't match up with what you expect? Well, there's only two ways you can feel good in this situation. You can give up wanting what you want, tell yourself it wasn't really worth the effort, you didn't really want it anyway. Or you can change your expectations to match up with what you want so that you can take consistent action.
Now, one thing I want to put a caveat in here, and one caveat I want to put in here is that obviously in our case there are certain capital T truths that we recognize, but in a non-Muslim context, or let's say a non-religious, not even non-religious, I guess we could say non-religious in this case, right? So in a more modern worldview perspective of things, where there is no God or there is no influencing factor outside, external influencing factor that is impacting, and it has control, kind of overseeing the system and so on. In those situations, in those modern worldview situations, they don't really have this idea of necessarily capital T truths. Now, there are two different things, two different aspects of this. One of them is when you point at the sun, for example, and you say that is the sun. So that's more information that I designate, right? But then there's also the other one, which is the one which is we are trying to identify. So, for example, the concept of what's right and wrong. These are moral issues, and Islamically, we have a capital T truth for this. But outside of that framework, it's oftentimes very relative. So just keeping in mind over here that sometimes you will need to change what you want, because what you want may not actually be right, or it might not be good, or it might not match capital T truth and so on. So we can adjust that. It doesn't necessarily mean that I need I need to do that in every case. It just means that it is something that might need to be done in certain cases. Also, we need to understand that one of the things that we have in capital T truth is that just because you want something and you put effort into it and so on, doesn't mean that you're guaranteed the end result. From our perspective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires from us the planning part of it, the execution part of it, whatever it is that we think we're going to work on. So we're going to put the effort in. And number three, so first is planning, number two is execution, actually going and doing it, and number three, adjusting our plans according to what we end up finding of reality, because the results were not necessarily guaranteed in this world, and so we don't need to expect a certain thing in particular necessarily. We can expect, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to make whatever is good for me come up at the end of the road, but it may be what I'm looking for, and if it's not, no problem. Whatever ends up being there might actually be a lot better than what I had in mind.
So how do you do that? I'm going to give you 3 simple steps that'll help you begin to shift your expectations. What I want you to do right now, though, is imagine an upcoming future event.
Now, in this case, notice that she's going to focus on things that you might have a little bit more control over, in which case, just go along with this, inshallah. But otherwise, when it comes to things that we don't have control over, or certain things that are beyond the scope of what she's talking about, things that may not be like in your calendar, for example, whatever. So just keep that in mind, that that's something that has a different framework. So whatever she's talking about, to an extent, it makes sense. But idea is the same, that your expectations can influence how you feel, how you respond to situations, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how you feel about the world, how you feel about your spouse, your kids, your friends, your society, whatever it might be.
It can be a goal that you're trying to achieve, a work presentation, upcoming holiday event with your family. Got it? Okay, what I want you to do for step number 1 is ask yourself, how is what I'm expecting making me feel? If you're expecting something positive to happen, then you're going to be feeling really good about it, and you can stop right there. No need to fix positive emotions. But if you're expecting something you don't want, then you're going to be feeling a negative emotion, like anxiety, fear, dread, overwhelmed. And those are all signs that you have some negative expectations about that situation. Step number 2, ask yourself, what would I like to have happen instead? What this question identifies is what you really do want in the situation. What you want is oftentimes the very thing that you're not expecting. Remember, you want to win the lottery, but you don't expect to. Step number 3, ask yourself, what do I need to do to make what I want happen?
So notice she went into some of the goal planning strategies that we were talking about.
When you have a negative expectation about a future event, it's because you're focused on all the things that could go wrong, why it's not going to work out for you. You're not generating thoughts and ideas about how to make it go right. When you see a plan laid out in front of you for how to get what you want, your assessment of the situation starts to change. You begin to see the possibility. This is where the shift happens. Every successful action that you take towards that plan starts to change your expectations.
Notice these are the data points in the line of best fit.
So I realize some of you might be thinking, I don't expect this to work for me. And to be perfectly honest, several years ago, I may not have expected a simple process like this to make a difference in people's lives either. But I was working with a very depressed patient. I had been treating him for about 6 months, and we'd done so much work together, but nothing we did seemed to make any difference. One day I asked him, where is the light at the end of the tunnel? He looked at me with one of the blankest stares I had ever seen. After that day, I started asking all of my patients this question, and I was startled to realize that many of them looked at me in the exact same way. They didn't dare to dream about how their lives could be different because they didn't believe it was possible. So I started to change the focus of my work to almost exclusively helping my patients shift those expectations so that they could find their light at the end of the tunnel. 5 years of research shows changing your expectations can significantly improve your life. And I witnessed some very awe-inspiring transformations. The patient I mentioned earlier, within a year, had quit his dead-end job and started his own successful company. When you're motivated by what you want, change is possible. In the words of Henry Ford, whether you think you can or think you can't, you are right. Your past isn't what defines who you are or where you're going. It's your expectations of the future that limit you most. Now here's the good news. You can choose. You can choose to take action based on what you want, and when you do that, you give yourself the opportunity to step out of the past and create the life that you truly want to live. Thank you.
All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and do this and we'll close out, inshallah. Any thoughts on this? Anything, anything that stood out from the last time or compared to the last time, this time around?
I was just thinking about how sometimes if you acknowledge that there is a link between the health conditions and the traumatic experiences in childhood, that that sometimes helps people because they feel like, okay, there's a reason why this happened.
feeling it random.
Right. Unless, so it's not just like, oh, this other thing, you know, this happened and this happened and this happened, but no, they can view it as it was actually an effect of something else. And then today, I think that last speech was very, very interesting. How she's really clearing, like a lot of times we will make dua for something, but we will just make the dua, but we won't actually like try to make that happen for ourselves. You know, we just kind of, we ask Allah for something, but we don't take a lot of actions as if it's going to manifest.
As if the simple act of dua is the only thing that's required and nothing else is required.
Right. Yeah. So there, I think those are pretty much in line with, you know, when you're making your dua or your dream dua, you know, you have that vision in your head and you can really see it and imagine, you know, that thing happening for you or you getting that thing, whatever your topic is. But yeah. So maybe that positive mindset and visualization of things improving would help somebody in this situation as well.
Yeah, and also notice over here it said that the end vision should be it should be written and it should be very, very clear, and it should be detailed and so on. It should be meaningful and stuff, right? So
right.
This is what we taught this person over here, and we helped this person at least like understand that there is a process, and you can see the end, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe you were looking into the tunnel, and that's why you kept on looking at it and feeling like it's dark. But if you turn around and you kind of see where you were coming from, you might see the light of that tunnel because that's where you came from.
Right. Like I can imagine somebody who's been, you know, who had really bad relationships, very traumatic relationships, you know, just having very difficult time trying to get into another one.
Yeah.
Like actually trusting people enough to get into it.
Yeah. And also when you actually get out of one of those situations and you just feel, sometimes you might feel like you just like that, you know, nothing is gonna work out. Maybe something's wrong with you and things like that. And you just so like just overall just feel defeated and you feel like I can't really do anything now. Like how am I don't know if I'm gonna ever be happy. I don't know if I'm gonna get a person I can trust. I don't know if I'm gonna ever find
Right.
something that I want or need or whatever. And it just kind of makes you really, really overwhelmed. And I actually have cases like this. Actually, one of the cases that I don't know if you remember, one of the earlier cases that we presented, and we mentioned that there are multiple. I combined multiple cases into one, one presentation, and I said that there's multiple things in here or multiple cases I pulled from, and pretty much these were people that had gotten into relationships and they got out. They had like, you know, situations, and they just kind of like these cycles were happening, and then when like they would get out, they would have these like breakdowns. They would, you know, wake up in the middle of the night and stuff, and think that life is not going to work out for them and so on. So it was like really, you know, something like that. And some of those cases are still active, and ultimately, you know, the same struggle is happening over here. That they feel like whatever I do, everything's gonna fail. I don't expect myself to get out of this situation and stuff, and like it's just that kind of, you know.
Right. And then the risk is not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Any other thoughts on this? Mohammed, do you have something? Okay, so we can pause over here, inshallah. In the meantime, if you have any thoughts on this, if you have any other, you know, discussions or comments or anything like that, then you can also reach out to me directly, or we can discuss it next time. In the meantime, I hope today's, you know, discussion was useful, And I hope this also added some of today's stuff, added a little bit more dimension or a little bit more depth to what we were discussing over here of this last time, and the stuff we looked at last time to try to figure out the answer to this question right here, or the riddle. So just keeping this in mind, moving forward, there's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of possibilities out there, but sometimes we get so, I guess, bounded, right, by our past, experiences and thought processes and so on. And it makes sense from a brain's perspective, because the brain is just trying to make sure that you are in a situation that's not constant, where you're not constantly hurt. Well, so it makes sense that the brain is just trying to protect you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed it to be like that, so it doesn't and of course I'm not saying that the brain has its own mind or whatever and stuff. What I am saying is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed it so that it gets used to certain things, and it helps you avoid certain things and stuff, so it's more functional in terms of helping you stay away from harm and negative stuff or whatever. So understanding how the brain works, then we can also train it in new contexts in a different way, and then just adapt to that. That's it. It's sort of similar, or the AI model that they have nowadays, or natural learning. It's similar to how the brain works, and the idea is pretty much overall just trying to understand, acquire information, adapt, and kind of adjust to new information and new patterns and trends and things like that. So keeping that in mind, if we can use the same approach for our brain, because if our brain is neuroplastic indeed, and it is something that constantly changes, and new brain cells are even apparently formed, then in that case there's always hope, bi'idhnillah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's always hope until the last moment. So keeping that in mind, maybe we can use these experiences, these understandings, a blend of whatever science is starting to confirm, but at the same time what we had Islamically all along with us, then putting it together, because these modern sciences, if we frame it as the understanding of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created things, which means then it becomes, as all of it is under the umbrella of Islamic sciences, then in that case we can use this to help people in various capacities, in various situations, get out of the situations, get out of the negative situations and so on, and become people that can thrive in their communities and so on.
I tried to respond before, but my headphones weren't working right. But I just wanted to add, for this situation, I feel like it would be helpful if you broke up their mental and health conditions, separated them, because I could imagine how it would all start to feel jumbled up and overwhelming if you see I have all these issues, health, mental, and I could see how that would feel like it's piling up. But if you take a moment with them and break them up and organize what's really going on, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so you're saying pretty much go down to the root and identify that and say, let's focus on those things first, and then these things we'll focus on next, because these are things that are impacted, but these are connected to something before that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the health issues, I don't know, you should have a course of action for that, and once they feel relieved of that, then it would probably be easier for them to focus on the mental stuff.
But what if the mental stuff is actually causing it? Like Sister Tara was mentioning about how, if they understand that there is a cause to a lot of these, potentially there's a cause to a lot of their health conditions. If one of the videos before, when we were talking about the ACE study, we were talking about how people who had trauma and so on actually had health impacts and stuff, right? So if we are able to say that potentially there is an impact because of trauma on your health conditions, then in that case we can prioritize certain things accordingly. We can say, hey, it's connected to this potentially, so let's go ahead and identify this and figure this out.
Yeah, I guess it could be that where you have to kind of fix them simultaneously. I guess it depends on this, the health issues specifically. If it's just you have cancer or something, then it's not really related. It's not caused by your mental health. It's just something that happened. Or if it's, I guess it just depends on the situation.
Yeah, that's depend on the situation. Now, the mental health would then be a confounding variable because we don't know what is actually causing the situation, right? So in this case, kind of narrowing it down or kind of at least identifying that, hey, potentially this could be a like a like an influencing factor that leads to this stuff, right? So if the trauma is a risk factor that elevates the likelihood of getting certain things, certain health conditions, then in that case we can say, okay, let's at least rule out that. Once we rule that out, then we'll know if it's actually mental health related or trauma related or if it's something else. Because either way, the person should probably already be getting the the physical health treatment and stuff, but at the same time, we can also help kind of give them the possibility of the connection between the two. So yeah, I guess in this case, just the idea of the confounding variable would be something that we would try to resolve by trying to present a possible link between mental health and physical health. So if I'm gonna see if I can send you that link, inshallah. So the person who was presenting that talk, she was mentioning how the study actually showed there was a lot of health factors that got impacted, physical health factors that were impacted because of trauma in the past. And so she mentioned many of these, like related to heart and like many other health conditions that were impacted because of. So it could be that many of the situations that people are actually experiencing could be related to that. So let me see if I can send it to you, inshallah, and then maybe you're talking about something different. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. In that case, we can clarify that, inshallah. And if it's something that we were talking about the same thing, then we'll be able to clarify that. So let me go ahead and share that with you, inshallah, separately, and then we'll go from there. What do you think?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. But yeah, there are possibilities of where it's not connected to the mental health at all. And in that case, we'll just have to kind of figure out if we can rule out the confounding variable of mental health, especially if there is mental health. If there's no mental health involved, then in that case, then obviously, then that doesn't seem to be the link over here, like trauma in the past or whatever. Okay, so if there's nothing else, inshallah, then we'll go ahead and close this. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.